Hey everyone, welcome back to Free the Money. I have a really special guest today. He's one of my friends that I met at XRP Vegas this year. He has one of the best XRP YouTube channels, in my opinion. He's so knowledgeable on XRP and Ripple and always has the best insights. So, welcome to the show, Mickle.
Appreciate you for having me. Really excited to be here and excited to jump into the markets.
There's so much happening. I feel like every day we're just getting brand new news. So, obviously, people are wondering about what's going on with these ETFs.
Yeah, the ETFs are kind of one of the more interesting things happening in terms of the progression of this market to a more sophisticated level. Um, ETFs broadly in their simplest form allow people who might not be as experienced in the cryptocurrency industry to be able to get access to the industry in a way that makes them feel more comfortable. I think a lot of people in crypto take for granted how difficult it is to get on an exchange and use a self-custody wallet. And for a lot of people, their biggest thing is they just want exposure to the price movement of these assets and to be able to hold them in a way they feel secure. So the ETFs do a lot for that. Now, the thing that people don't talk about on the ETFs that I think is really exciting is the perception it gives the market. This isn't factual or it's not true, but this is the way the market looks at it. The market looks as an ETF as a blessing to a specific asset that is now regulated or approved by the SEC. Now, like I said, that's not technically how it works really at all, but it's how the market perceives it. So it brings a lot of confidence from people to see those products built in an ecosystem and allows investment managers or other people who are managing money to be able to allocate to some of these things more confidently. So it's a big vote of confidence as well for the market in regards to a certain asset, but also opens the spigot for new money to be invested that typically might not be able to access the cryptocurrency market.
So we saw the first spot ETF last week with Canary Capital, and it looked like that was the biggest ETF of the year. Is that true?
Yeah, and I think out of like 930 ETFs this year, it ranked number one, which is super exciting to see. And it even beat out a lot of the first days for a lot of the Bitcoin ETFs. Now, the really cool thing there as well is that when you look at the size of the issuer, Canary is actually a pretty small firm. Just a simple analysis of just looking at how many people follow them on X will let you know that it's like a
Yeah.
really small firm that kind of jumped in ahead of this. So to see that this small firm that doesn't have a ton of existing AUM or clients to market it to was able to break the record for an ETF on the year shows that there was substantial demand here, and we're likely going to see even larger numbers when people like Franklin Templeton, who is slated to go live very soon, comes in because they have like 1.4 trillion under management. So it was a really, really positive sign to see that level of excitement on a smaller issuer's ETF, and really paves the road for some really big numbers and records to continue to be broken as we have some of these other issuers step in. So I think we have something like 18 of them or something in the pipeline now. And that's just more and more people that are going to be then exposed to it. And then as Franklin
Mhm.
Templeton launches it, they'll be able to talk to their clients and be like, hey, maybe you want some exposure here. So it opens up the conversations, it opens up the access, it opens up the gateway, and just allows more people to come into this asset without the same level of barriers we saw previously.
Awesome. So how's the Bitwise ETF performing? Didn't that launch today?
Yeah, the Bitwise ETF just went live, and I haven't gotten a look at the numbers of where they currently stand. But when I checked this morning, it had a lower initial volume than the first one live, but it was accelerating faster in terms of people going in, which makes a ton of sense because when the first XRP spot ETF went live, you probably had a wall of people just looking to get access to it first
Yeah.
thing as the XRP spot ETF. Now what you're seeing is more people are coming in, and Bitwise isn't necessarily going to capture that group of people who are well informed and ready to buy the first one, but they have a much bigger client base where they'll be able to ramp that volume in. So we saw a lower initial tick, albeit still very high, almost in comparison to that first one we saw,
Mhm.
but a faster uptrend in how fast people are coming in. So when it's all said and done, I anticipate it's probably going to be on the same level or maybe even a little bit higher than the first one we saw. Bitwise is, I would call, like a medium to small firm. They still rank very small in comparison to like a Franklin Templeton.
Awesome. So a lot of people are upset that we're not seeing huge price movement with the launch of these ETFs, but we do see that the market right now is down, so it does make some sense. But could you explain to the audience why we're not seeing huge price movement right now when we're seeing
Yeah,
all this new liquidity into the market?
yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things too where like over longer time horizons, these things really play themselves out. But when you really look at the market on its most basic form, it's really just buyers and sellers. And those buyers and sellers are really competing to create the price. Um, you can make a really valid argument that XRP has been really performing much better than it normally does when Bitcoin sells off in times like this. And you can easily make the argument that a lot of that is due to the counteracting of these ETFs and so much buy volume coming in there. But at the end of the day, it's really important to understand one key thing. There's always, the market's not necessarily super forward looking in terms of these buys. In fact, a lot of times what you'll see is Bitcoin coming down in price. Then 3 or 4 days later, you'll find out that the last 2 weeks, a very large Bitcoin whale was unloading a multi-million-dollar Bitcoin position. So sometimes these things, the price reacts a little bit later than you might initially see it on one single candle. I think what we're likely going to see is a lot of the narratives that are driving the market right now in terms of things that I don't think are going to be sticky, like fear around what the government shutdown did, fears around tariffs. I think those things are going to really fizzle out because they always do. And then you'll see a lot of the more cryptocurrency narratives come back in, and everyone's going to be like, wait, there was just an ETF launch just doing X volume and sucking up all this XRP. Wait, that's a lot more impactful than some tariffs or a government shutdown that didn't really have an impact. So the market in the short term can hyper focus on sort of the wrong thing or look the wrong way, but ultimately refocuses over the long run on the more important fundamentals taking place. So I would say it's a mix of you could call it unlucky timing in terms of seeing the upside, or you can say lucky timing in preventing a further crash like we normally would see with illiquid markets in times like this. But overall, I think it's just a blip on the radar. And as you start to look out over the next couple of weeks and months, you're going to see that narrative come back in where people are going to say, hey, XRP is going up X amount. It's likely because of these ETFs, even if it's not necessarily on each individual ticker on each individual
Okay.
day.
Oh, that's very insightful. Okay, so you talk a lot on your channel about tokenization, and we're seeing, companies like BlackRock, JP Morgan, and others transitioning real world assets like stocks, bonds, and treasuries into DLT rails. And I know you talk a lot how the XRP ledger was built for tokenization. Why do you think these institutions will be choosing, a neutral, decentralized network rather than building their own private chains?
Yeah, well, I do think they're going to probably build their own private chains, but it doesn't really solve anything for what cryptocurrency really meant to do. So a lot of these institutions, I mean, their own databases are severely outdated, and even when they're just doing internal transactions within the company, I mean, they're dealing with frictions there they probably shouldn't have to deal with. And it makes a ton of sense for JP Morgan to have a JP Morgan ledger, and if they need to move money between accounts, just have a better way to do it.
Hmm.
But that doesn't solve the problem for JP Morgan to be able to interact with another financial institution, or for JP Morgan to be able to go into open, decentralized public markets and source liquidity that way. One of David Schwartz's best quotes, in my opinion, as of recently, has been that a lot of these financial institutions are going to choose rather to have no boss than a boss who's their biggest competitor.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, a lot of financial institutions are just going to say, look, I don't want to go into this other company's order book. I don't want to rely on this company's infrastructure. I'd rather just go to the public market. And we saw this exact build out in the internet and databases. It wasn't that companies just only use the public web to transact or transact on information. It was that they set up private databases, and those private databases interacted with the public databases. So I think you're going to see that same thing. I think a lot of people look at it in one extreme or the other, but likely JP Morgan and all these other financial institutions are going to be tokenizing trillions of dollars worth of their assets. And those assets will probably start initially on private chains. And then what they're going to do is require public liquidity or require interaction with other
Hmm.
intermediaries in which those public rails get a lot more momentum. So it's more of a building process. But the biggest thing to understand is that these financial institutions have trillions and trillions and quadrillions of assets, and they need to move those assets to the upgraded infrastructure, or they're just going to lose clients to people who are doing that. You've already seen that in examples of like 24-hour trading on Robinhood. People just started closing their legacy brokerage accounts to go get access to better markets. So there's no doubt, and you can listen to any of these financial institutions talk about it, that these public decentralized markets are so much better for liquidity, for transaction speed, for settlement. And eventually, the entire market is just going to switch to where capital's most efficient, which is going to be on the public rails. But it doesn't mean they won't need their own private chains to organize things internally. That still makes a lot of sense. And I don't think it should be something that scares people if they hear that, because really, the more private databases you have, the more private chains you have, the more you need public chains. And the more public chains you have, the more people are using public chains, the more they need private chains. So there are two things that grow together. I think some people sometimes focus too much on one or
Hmm.
the other and think, oh no, this is going to kill
When they
XRP.
really
Or
need to be working together.
yeah, and if you have a bank account right at a bank, like you don't want necessarily that to be a public bank account. So there's all
No, of
kinds of
course
things
not.
where privacy comes into play, and certain things that don't require full decentralized settlement. If you're just moving it from one Bank of America account to another, that can be done in an Excel sheet. But for you to go from Bank of America to another financial institution
Yeah.
or be able to source liquidity more globally, that's where public chains are going to be
And it
very
needs to be
important.
neutral and interoperable. If not, I
Exactly.
mean, it wouldn't make sense. What type of timeline for this rollout be?
Yeah, I think it's really on a lot of the financial institutions at this point. I think for the longest time, you saw a lot of people not wanting to mess up and not want to break any rules. Obviously, when you have enforcement actions flying from the SEC, people are a little slower and a little bit more skeptical to say, hey, I want to go do this right now. But if you have a more proactive administration, then a lot of those things are become very important because they don't want to be last, right? Being last isn't such a big deal if all your biggest competitors are getting sued for doing what they're doing. But if everyone's now being encouraged to do those things, then being last is a big problem because you're going to fall behind. So I think you're likely going to see a lot of developments come out as the clarity bill gets rolled out. I think that's going to be a huge catalyst. But still, just like the ETFs, don't expect it to all happen day one, right? It's going to take,
Instantaneously, yeah.
like, these firms have to go through board of directors, they need to talk to different people, they need to implement policy, they need to implement product lines, and those things take time. But at the end of the day, they really don't have a choice. People are going to move to where capital moves the most efficient and where the innovation is and where the product sets are, and they're going to be forced to catch up with the rest of the market or risk losing their clients to other firms who are willing to embrace it.
Like in the long run, let's talk, I don't know, like 3 years from now. Obviously, this is not going to be an instant thing, but if we're seeing trillions
Yeah,
into the
no,
market, like,
absolutely. And I think one of the things that people forget is, like, a lot of people put like caps on like what XRP could go to in these specific situations we talk about. And I think one of the things that I always draw back to is if you go look at very early conversations about Google and Amazon and some of these tech behemoths, everyone always said, oh, Google could never get to $100 a share because that'd be twice the size of the biggest company on earth, which is ExxonMobil, an oil company, and the internet's never going to be more valuable than oil. That was completely wrong. The internet was exponentially more valuable in many degrees than oil, and it totally changed everything. And there's a new valuation metric, and these companies came in and garnered market caps into trillions, which no one thought was theoretically possible before. And what we're looking at is an advent of a new technology and a new asset class that, in my opinion, is more valuable than the movement of information. It's the movement of value. It's the restructuring of money itself. So I do think over the long run, right, these things are going to have multiples that seem insane today. You're probably going, I have a feeling that the crypto asset class could be the first asset class that is valued in the quadrillions, or you have market
wow.
caps in the quadrillions over the long run. I think a lot of the big companies like Nvidia and Tesla will push into the tens of trillions and maybe even hundreds of trillions, or already in the trillions. But there's going to be something that usurps that. And I think the digitization of money and value on its own is going to be one of the primary things that everyone looks back for him and says, do we remember when we thought that these things couldn't get to trillions in market cap? Now they're sitting at this, just like we said the same exact thing in the internet companies in the early days. So where exactly that number falls on XRP is going to be determined by its own success, right? How much of this volume is driven to XRP? How much can it stay a leader in the market in comparison to other things? Those are things I don't really worry about so much because I love the way the XRP ledger is positioned. I love the way that Ripple makes it easy for financial institutions to step into
Mhm.
crypto, and I think it will continue to be a leader. And from there, where XRP sits in 3 years and how much it shocks me to the upside in the world, I'm all for seeing where that number pans out.
With that being said, we're seeing Ripple making huge acquisitions recently with Treasury. What do you think this is doing for the position of Ripple? And I see that it's like a direct line between traditional finance and obviously just changing the rails into more of a into DeFi. So what do you think this says about Ripple and I guess the future of how banking will be?
Well, it's genius in my opinion, and it was one of the biggest problems with crypto. We kind of touched about this earlier, but if you have an asset manager with trillions of dollars under management, right? Like, how do you get that money onto decentralized blockchain rails? That's been the hurdle recently. It's like, what needs to be implemented for this to make a ton of sense for people to start doing? And Ripple, in my opinion, had a genius idea. Just go start getting those infrastructure players, start buying them, and start implementing blockchain to them. If a banking institution, right, is hooked up to a whole bunch of different decent or a whole bunch of centralized markets already, that's
Mhm.
already their infrastructure for treasuries. Why not just work with the infrastructure provider, get them to implement blockchain technology? Then suddenly you have billions of clients using blockchain without even knowing it. That's really where I think this technology is going to sit over the long run. I don't think it's necessarily going to be for everyone to say, let me go pull out my wallet and let me
No.
start swapping XRP for treasuries. This is really a back end sort of thing. In the same exact way, we're doing this interview right now, and neither of us went onto the internet and created our own decentralized hosting protocol, right? We just logged into someone who's providing the service and they handle all the implementation. I think the same thing is going to happen for crypto, where maybe in 5 years from now, half the population is
Yeah.
using cryptocurrency without even realizing it. And what Ripple does is it makes that easy for institutions to implement. Not every single financial institution has a blockchain expert or has the time to go reinvent how they interact on these new rails. They're not technology companies at the end of the day. They're
Yeah.
banking institutions. So they need someone to come in and simplify it for them so they can simplify it for their customers. And I just think that idea is going to be extremely powerful in getting mass adoption rather than convincing everyone that they need to go out and love crypto and do it all on their own.
Yeah.
I don't think that's very
So
realistic.
like one day we're gonna wake up and everyone's going to be using XRP without even realizing it. But I do think it's really important to point out too with G Treasury, like you said, they do have relations with over 13,000 banks. And I think it's dealing with like almost $13 trillion. And I think one of the relations they have is with Swift, which I find really
Yep.
interesting. So what happens to Swift in the long run?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes the same way as kind of we're seeing in a lot of other markets. And I think a great example is sort of what happened with Ford. And you go look at someone like Tesla, where, it's not that Ford couldn't figure out the electric vehicle business. It's just that they're significantly worse at it than
Okay.
people who run their business in that landscape. And now what Ford is doing is they're working with Tesla on batteries, or they're working with Tesla on self-driving, because you have this super innovative firm and you don't want to admit that this firm is necessarily better at you than X, Y, and Z. But every single smart person that gets out of college, they want to go work for Ripple because that's the cool, exciting thing to do. They get all the best software engineers. And it's hard to compete when you're running a business like Swift, right? Where introducing blockchain cannibalizes their current business. They're like completely different in terms of how they operate. So I think in the short term, instant payments, instant liquidity, decentralized settlement, that might not be important to every single firm out there. They might be fine for Swift for the next couple years. But there's
Hmm.
going to be a lot that say absolutely not. We want the
Yeah.
fastest way we can move money. And which are they going to go to? They're probably going to do the company that's been doing it longer and experts in that respective space. So, does Ford still sell electric vehicles? Absolutely. Is it something that is
I think they're
merely on
dis
the
I think they're discontinuing electric vehicles actually.
Yeah, because they
Yeah.
couldn't really do it to the same degree Tesla did. So it's going to be really interesting to see how quickly they adapt. If there's anything we've learned from history and seeing these sort of things happen, they will try to adapt, and it will be up to them to see how much they can compete in this new
Yeah.
world. But Ripple's always going to be 10
And
steps ahead, in my
and we are
opinion.
seeing them, I guess, try to compete with Ethereum's consensus,
Yep.
which, it's like, okay, Ripple has been around for a long time. They're pretty good at what they do. You don't just one day wake up and say like, oh, I just want to compete. It doesn't make sense that I don't see it as competition.
No, and even if it is competition, like even if it is competition to a certain level, competition is good. I mean,
Yeah, of course.
competition is excellent. You want competition because you want Ripple to keep innovating and have reasons to say, hey, we need to win on this front even more than we were already winning. So competition is not a bad thing at all. And I think a lot of people get worried when they see competition and say, oh, now this person's going to win. There's going to be a whole bunch of winners, but who has the best product over the long run is going to be the big winner. And I don't think anyone's really that close to disrupting the market that Ripple has already set forth and is
Yeah,
already starting to
like totally
disrupt. So
established, and so you're not worried about this.
no, no. In fact, I think it's incredibly bullish because for the longest time, the big conversation was, is do you even need this technology, right? Like,
Hmm.
how important is this technology? And now all the competitors are capitulating and saying, oh, we have to hurry up and roll out a product before everyone goes and does something else. So it's one of those things, it's really just validation. I mean, for the longest time, all these banks, they all just said, we don't need it. It's not used for anything. It's pointless. And we were all speculating that it would be very powerful. Now they're saying, oh my God, we need to put a plan in place because it's so powerful and we're going to start losing business if we don't do something here. It's a huge validation that this stuff is extremely valuable. It will be used and they will need to compete on this front to stay relevant. Will they be able to drive the best product in the market? I'm skeptical of that. I think they'll continue to lag behind. They'll still keep customers. They'll still have a business, in my opinion. But is it going to scale? Which one will be bigger? Which one will be powerful? Which one will be seen as a more premium product? I'd place my money on Ripple beating out Swift on something like that because look at the head start they already have.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think time will tell, and I have faith in Ripple.
And it's one of those things I think they can continue, like, it's just on the things they execute on. I mean, it's one thing to have a very powerful technology, but when you have really good leadership that continues to, I mean,
Hmm.
impress me significantly, even on things like you said with G Treasury. I mean, those are high level acquisitions that I think just elevate Ripple across the rest of the industry. I see a lot of people
Yeah,
focusing on things I don't care about, and then I see a deal landed by Ripple. I'm like, oh my God, that's huge. That's super impactful. Like you said, 13,000 banks connected to G Treasury. I mean, those are things that move the needle, in my opinion, over some
yeah.
of the other big PR announcements you see in the industry.
No, definitely. I feel like people are finally taking XRP seriously. And obviously, we have an amazing community around us and people that have believed in XRP for a very long time. But now you're seeing people that I think this is also exciting. You're seeing people like David Portnoy on X talking about how he just made a big purchase of XRP. And you have it like people like Eric Trump also retweeting that. I think that's very telling for the market we're in. And also, we're also seeing people really leaving Bitcoin and kind of fed up with Bitcoin. But I also do want to talk about Evernorth, the XRP Treasury. And I've watched some of your videos when you kind of compare it to what Michael Saylor is doing with his Bitcoin treasury, I guess. And you talk a lot about how with this XRP treasury, how we're actually making a profit on this rather than just having it a store of value where people are just continuing to buy on debt.
Yeah, I mean, the whole MicroStrategy idea, I think, kind of fueled the market with ideas on other things they can do. But I mean, very simply, like, there's no business at MicroStrategy right now. At least things can
Well, what
change,
do they
but
do? What do they do?
I don't know. And that's not something that I think has really been made clear to shareholders of MicroStrategy either. I mean, right now it seems like what they do is they take out debt that has a coupon on it, so they owe 3%, and then they buy Bitcoin. But if they never sell the Bitcoin,
Yeah,
where's
they're
the
not
money
making a
being made?
profit, and how are they paying
Yeah, no,
back? I
there's no
guess,
profit.
yeah,
So I
Americans
love
don't
that Ripple
care about
approach.
debt, though, I guess.
Yeah, I love that Evernorth is approaching it from a, hey, let's do this, but let's run a business. Let's make money. If we have a 2% debt payment, let's go figure out how to make 5 or 6%. That's a positive carry, and you can run a business there. It just seems more well thought out. It seems like you have some really high level people with David Schwartz and Ashish
Mhm.
Burla there. Um, just a really cool, impressive idea. And my fingers are crossed that everything works out really, really well and things get pushed forward. I mean, I think they will. I'm very confident in the team. It's still something that the market has never seen before. You've never seen these treasury companies before. So I think Ripple's approach or
Yeah.
Evernorth's approach there is really solid. And I like the way they're doing it, actually focusing on running a profitable business. But the market will be the longer term determiner of value there. And I think the market's going to love it.
So what are you excited most for at the moment with XRP and Ripple? Like any acquisitions
Um,
you have in mind, or I mean, I know they're very notorious for acquiring companies that we really have never heard of that are making major moves. But what do you think is next on their list?
yeah, so I think the thing I'm most excited about really seeing is starting to see some of those people who, I think they've been working with for a very long time who now feel more comfortable to come public sort of with those relationships. If I was a large banking institution and been working with Ripple, focusing on things for a really long time, but felt like it would be negative if I came out with information to the market about us doing that, that's going to suppress a lot of the information I'm willing to share. But if that flips into a positive in the market, right? If the market now looks at that as being innovative and cool and building out the business and having new things like available for clients and customers to look forward to, that suddenly turns into a very positive catalyst in order to talk about more publicly. So I think with the Ripple SEC case ending and with a lot of clarity coming to the market, you're going to see the market a lot more willing to engage in a public
Mhm.
forum, and I think we're going to learn about all kinds of new partnerships and cool things going on that weren't publicly available for the longest amount of time or hidden from the market. So I'm really excited to hear about some of that stuff that's probably been worked on for a very long period of
Mhm.
time, but not necessarily shown to the public because there was no reason to at the time. The public didn't need to know about it, and it was something that was still questionable in terms of whether it's something people wanted to make known. I think that's changing in a really big way.
I saw something on X yesterday. I think Brad Garlinghouse reposted this. It was from a Ripple employee who was talking about soon there will be staking on the XRP ledger. Are you familiar with this or do you know anything about this?
I looked into it briefly and it looked very interesting. I think what they're doing is looking to change the XRP ledger's consensus to be able to add different feature sets where staking could be applicable. I still
Hmm.
think it's very early discussion on how things get implemented. But one of the things I love, it just shows the progression. Like the XRP that I bought in 2018 has completely different feature sets and completely different capabilities than it has today, all while the supply has continued to go down. So it's like this token is becoming more and more valuable with time. And I think you're
Hmm.
going to continue to see evolution on the XRP ledger to the point where we look at the XRP ledger in 4 or 5 years from now. It's going to be like, oh my God, I didn't even think these things were possible at the time.
Yeah. So when the XRP ledger was created, what do you think David Schwartz had in mind for a price target that would make the most sense in order to be using it like for cross-border payments?
It's a really good question. And, I think it's something that they've obviously been very cautious on to
Hmm.
speculate on. But you
And
can go look at
I
like,
know this is just speculation, but I'm just curious.
yeah, no, and I think like if you look at some of the early forums, like David had comments like XRP can't be low if it's been used at this kind of volume. At the time he said that, I think XRP was in the like 50 cent range. So if he considers that low, like what's high? Is that in the hundreds of dollars? Is that in the
Hmm.
thousands of dollars? Um, that's one of those things I'm not entirely sure. I think David has seen enough things in his lifetime to realize that if this thing gets mass adoption, right, like how much more powerful is that than what Doge is currently being valued at in the market? Um,
Yeah.
I would say significantly. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if in a time of mass adoption, XRP was 1,000 times or 10,000 times more valuable than something like Dogecoin. So the market's going to assign new multiples to these things. And I think if
Hmm.
you look at the early comments made by the Ripple team, you can tell that they think the same exact thing. They just have to be very careful about what they
Yeah.
say because of things like the SEC case. I don't think they want to come out with anything that would implicate any kind of further issue there than they've already had. But, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if David and those people saw double and triple digits in their own time horizons when it comes to mass adoption of this market.
Yeah. So where do you think XLM fits into all of this?
This is the one that, you know,
I
this is the
had
one
to.
for me that people don't like my opinion on. And me personally, I have nothing wrong with XLM or Stellar as the technology, but I also don't necessarily agree necessarily with some of the decisions they've made along the way, whether or not that was burning half their escrow or whether or not that was different people who were put in positions of kind of power there, decision making people at the Stellar Foundation. Um, I look at it like for the longest time I was in crypto, the narrative that was like XLM was for retail and XRP was institutional. But all the retail products I see are being built on the XRP ledger. Like I see so many new products popping up every single day for retail, by retail on the
Yeah.
XRP ledger. I don't see as much on XLM. I always compare it to Google and Bing. I mean, that's how I see it. Is there a business for Bing? Absolutely. I want to have all my money in Google, though, because Google's where I see the mass adoption happening. So I think it's a little bit contrary to what a lot of people see. I think a lot of people look at XLM as more for retail or more for stable coins and things like
Hmm.
that. And we'll see how the market plays out. When you look at how these protocols are built, and how they garner attention and community. The XRP is probably the largest community out there, if not very close behind Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's sort of one of those things. It's like, well, if XLM's for retail, like where's necessarily that same level of community and interest? I think it's definitely there. There's a lot of people who like it, but when I like stack them against each other and look at it, for me, it's like, hey, I have a lot more confidence and I see a lot more things moving on the XRP side. So nothing against Stellar's tech, nothing against them potentially being a powerhouse in the future. But if I was to say which one do I think is more successful and I have to put all my money in one, I mean, like 100 times out of 100, I'm putting it in XRP.
I love the community drama. Recently on X, every time I open the app, it's people fighting. And I'm like, I'm always confused. I'm like, we are all supporting the same thing. Why are we hating on each other? But no, not in terms of XLM and XRP,
Yeah.
but just like the XRP community.
No, I think everyone kind of
Yeah.
takes a different path, right? You see some different, like you have like an institutional community in kind of
Yeah.
the XRP world. You have people who are more retail focused. You have people who are more on like riddles and like speculation. And like ultimately, people have to find their own path. And I always say, whatever gets you from point A to point B at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if I was 100% wrong and you were 100% right or someone else is 100% right. I could have the completely wrong thesis. And at the end of the day, if I have the wrong thesis and I still don't sell my XRP and you have the right thesis and you don't sell your XRP, it doesn't matter. We're all going to the same place anyway. So for me, it's just one of those things. People always bicker about this sort of stuff when it comes to investing and money's on the line. But at the end of the day, I think we're all here for one reason. And that's just because for whatever reason, we all see tremendously more value in XRP than it is right now in the market. And I think a lot of people want to be there for that growth, whether or not you're right, I'm right, person A, B, or C is right. It doesn't matter. As long as it gets us from point A to point B, we all end up in the same position regardless.
I love that. No, it's a great way to look at it. If you were to go on the street and interview the average person and ask them, oh, tell me a little bit about cryptocurrencies, they probably could only name Bitcoin. Obviously, that's what the market knows of. How long, and I know we've talked about institutional adoption and people not really being aware of it. How long until people do understand what XRP is doing and they will be able to name XRP?
You know, that's a two-part question because I think we're getting there pretty quickly with people like Dave Portnoy stepping in, but I don't even think like I could bring up to the average person on the street like the S&P 500 and they would have any
Okay,
idea
that
what
is
I'm talking
true.
about. So like there's a certain level of people who just don't care and that's fine. I
Okay,
mean,
yeah.
if people want to spend their life focusing more or less on financial side and they prefer spending money or being consumers, look, I probably have the opposite problem. I probably save too much money and don't spend enough time spending it and enjoying it. So I'm not here to say anyone has an incorrect strategy or wrong thing, but I don't think we'll ever reach the level where like every single person is going to know about it because like historically, like a lot of people just don't care at the end of the day. And
Or they
that's
don't have
totally
the
fine.
time.
I don't think it really matters because a lot of those people, right, they have retirement accounts regardless where money is
Hmm.
flowing into these things and they'll be invested in companies they've never even heard of before in their life. And I think as this asset class institutionalizes, In the same exact way where my grandma might send a wire in the future using XRP without even realizing it, it's also very possible XRP is in her retirement fund and she has no idea.
Yeah.
And I
Maybe
just
she's
think that's probably more of a human psychology thing than it is anything for XRP or Bitcoin to solve on their own.
Yeah, and it is pretty cool, like, how you were saying, like, she could even have it in her retirement fund. My mom, a few years ago, told me to roll over my retirement into I Trust Capital. I think I put all of it into XRP and Bitcoin, and it's been pretty cool to watch that over time. There are options like that these days. I bet you a
You
lot of people
probably
probably
did a
aren't
lot
aware
better
of.
than holding it in what you were holding.
I know, yeah, no, it was pretty cool, but yeah, my mom was the one who discovered it, and I'm really glad I listened to that advice.
Well,
Now
I
it's
don't think
like,
I've really told this story before, but funny enough, my dad is actually the person who got me an XRP. I mean, I was into crypto. I didn't have any idea about XRP. He is in the mortgage business. They move a lot of money and was like, "Hey, have you ever heard of this thing before?" And I was like, yeah, but it only kind of like thought I've seen online. Like, let me look into it. And then he created a monster, I guess. So I always joke around with him because of that.
that's amazing.
It's always funny sort of how you come across different things. I learned a very, very valuable lesson in the early days of um, never to look at anything like too broadly or never to just formulate an opinion on anything too quickly. I find a lot of people have preconceived notions of what something can or can't be and just kind of jump on that and never take the 15 minutes just to say, hey, am I actually interested in this or not, or am I just going based off something someone else told me? um I've made more money doing that and just questioning and just taking 15 minutes, 20 minutes just to say, oh, yeah, this is interesting. Like what I heard before, I
Mhm.
don't necessarily agree with what that person said. This looks great to me. So I learned that lesson very early on. And I think before in the past, if my dad had told me a cryptocurrency should be looking at, I might have said, I don't know about that one. But I learned that lesson and I said, you know what? Give me 10 minutes, give me 15 minutes, let me take a look. And then very quickly, I was like, oh, shoot, I am glad I did that.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's words to live by with what you just said. Not jumping to conclusions so fast, taking a deep breath, and like you said, taking 15 minutes just to research something. But I do feel so many people felt that way about XRP a few years ago. I remember when I would just bring up XRP to people and they would immediately just dismiss me because I was talking about XRP. And now I feel like people are finally kind of realizing the power it has and just maybe taking more time to investigate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, it's the biggest mistake I've consistently seen people make and mistakes I've made before in the past as well. You
Yeah.
just got to learn from it. And I remember I had my mind closed to a couple things in my very early investing days. And, it was one of those things where then I saw it mature and I took the time to research it. I'm like, if I had just given this 5 minutes before, I would have been all over it.
Yeah.
But I believed all
Yeah.
these preconceived notions that the market was telling me. And after that, I vowed to myself that, you know what, no matter what it is, I'll give it 5 to 10 minutes. And normally I can tell in that 5 to 10 minutes if it's something I'm interested in or not. But that way I don't look back and have this level of regret. And I think that's the biggest thing um, that people need to realize is like, look, just take 5 minutes, 10 minutes and try to prove yourself wrong. See if you can prove yourself wrong. Not sticking so tightly to your own positions and being open to hear what other people have to say is one of the most important things you can do over the long run. It's totally fine to disagree with someone or someone to come to me and say, hey, I don't like XRP for these 5 reasons. And me to say, oh, I actually like XRP for these 5 reasons, but we just have a different opinion. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that. But if you're going to come and recite things that are incorrect or have an uninformed opinion, that's more of your loss, right? And you're kind of just selling yourself short on stuff like that.
No, absolutely. Well, any last words you'd like to say? Any topics?
Um, no, I would say that I'm super excited to hopefully see you in XRP Vegas again and hopefully get you on the craps table this time. But no, it's been
Oh yeah,
awesome.
I know. We gotta. I think I was kind of by your side when you were gambling, but I need to gamble. I didn't gamble.
Dude, that's nice for everyone on it. More gambling.
I didn't necessarily gamble that night. I don't think. I think I just stood
No,
there.
no, no. No, but no, just really looking forward to it. It's always great to see everyone in person and get to talk with the community. And it's
Yeah.
been a blast to come on here and talk with you about some of this stuff. I think this discussion was overdue, and no, really happy and excited to see everything you're doing on this front, and
Oh,
just
thank
happy
you.
to
Yeah,
be a
and
part of
just
it.
just trying to do what I can, you know? It's like I know a little bit about a lot of different things, and if I'm able to share information with experts like you, to my audience, that's all I can ask for. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come here. And then, can you let the audience know what your X is and then your YouTube channel?
Yeah, just XRP Mickle XRP. I think X is Mickle XRP. I think YouTube is XRP Mickle.
Okay.
Just be cautious out there. There's so many scammers, but it
Oh
should be
my
pretty
gosh,
obvious
yeah.
which one's me.
It is.
Verified follower. Just check that out. But just type in Mickle, and I shouldn't be too hard to come by. Mickle out.